District 9 City Councilor. Today is Tuesday, June 26th. We are here with our CFO, Emma Handy, and Budget Director, Justin Sterrett, to review the resubmitted FY19 budget reflected in dockets 0973 through 0977. 0973, message and order for annual appropriation and tax order for FY19, 2019. Docket 0974, message and order for annual appropriation for the school department for fiscal year 2019. Docket 0975, message and order approving an appropriation of $40 million to the Other Post-Employment Benefits Liability Trust Fund established under Section 20 of Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 32B, Section 20, as added by Chapter 479 of the Acts of 2008. Docket 0976, message and order authorizing the City of Boston to appropriate the amount of $53,802 and $802,817 from the city's capital grant fund in order to provide funding for various transportation and public realm improvements. These projects are aligned with the goals of Go Boston 2030, the city's transportation master plan. The fund shall be credited to the capital grant fund from the parking meter fund. And finally, docket 0977, message and order approving an appropriation of $1,600,000 from the surplus disposition fund credited to the capital fund for the development of master plans, architectural and engineering plans and designs, and for the implementation of such plans and designs for Boston Common, Franklin Park, and the completion of the Emerald Necklace. I'd like to remind folks this is a public hearing, recorded and broadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964, and streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV. Ask folks in the chamber to silence their electronic devices. And please, at the conclusion of the presentation and questions and answers from my colleagues, we will take public testimony. There is a sign-in sheet to my left. We ask that you check the box if you do wish to testify. Please also state your name, any affiliation, and residence. And as this is the probably the last hearing before the vote tomorrow, for anybody that still wishes to provide feedback for us to engage in the process as we wrap it up, you can email the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov and or call us at this point, because we won't receive a letter in time. So with that, I'd like to introduce my colleagues in order of their arrival. To my left, Councilor Ed Flynn. To my immediate left, Councilor Anissa Sabi-George. To my left again, Councilor Andrea Campbell. To my right, Councilor Matt O'Malley and Councilor Josh Zakum. And with that, I'll hand it over to our budget team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Salmo, President Campbell, and members of the City Council. The budget before you for consideration in this hearing today and with the vote tomorrow includes historic levels of funding for progress, innovation, and opportunity across the city. The resubmission that Mayor Walsh filed earlier this month builds on all of those priorities in the underlying budget and continues that work in this final budget for your consideration. It reflects the mayor's strong commitment to responsible management of the city's finances and is a balanced, sustainable budget that reflects new investment in city's priorities that have been gleaned from over 30 budget hearings, the mayor's long-term planning like Imagine Boston 2030, and maybe even a few coffee hours. These priorities are in areas of, such as education, public safety, affordable housing, public health, parks, and streets. The budget before you includes a BPS budget that makes measurable investments into social and emotional staff at the Boston Public Schools Department, including 20 additional nurses, social workers, and other Cellwell staff. Over 80% or $40 million of the new funding for Boston Public Schools will go directly to schools so that they can have the maximum flexibility to serve their student needs. And in the resubmitted budget, the mayor has filed an increase in universal pre-K seats with an increase of expected charter school reimbursement funds that we anticipate to receive from the state in FY19, thanks to the advocacy of this council, the mayor, and many others who have done great work to advocate at the state level for increased reimbursement. This investment will increase the number of new high-quality pre-K seats to nearly 1,000. Creating affordable housing in the budget through things like doubling the down payment assistance program, creating affordable housing stock, and making targeted investments that will allow people to stay in their homes. This budget includes several investments in substance abuse treatment, including a permanent engagement center, new capital dollars to rebuild the Long Island Bridge, and prevention dollars at the Boston Public Health Commission. It strengthens our public safety force by providing for more police officers, EMTs, and firefighters, including increasing the police force by 30 police officers, which should be the largest policing capacity in over a decade. 20 new police cadets, and as I mentioned, new firefighters and EMT classes as well. The budget also includes a significant increase in transportation investment, which will allow us to encourage better traffic management and allow the city to dramatically accelerate the implementation of another long-term planning effort of the city, which is Go Boston 2030, and programs like Vision Zero. These investments will build 15 new slow streets, create 15 more miles of protected bike lanes, and improve our 15 most problematic intersections. All of these investments will have a positive impact across neighborhoods of the city of Boston, and I would like to thank Justin Sterrett and his team at the Office of Budget Management for their thoughtful and tireless work over the past few months as they pulled together the details of this budget. And with that, I will turn it over to Justin to review those details.
Thank you, Emma. Good morning, councilors. And thank you to Councilor Shiomo, President Campbell, and all the councilors here today. I really appreciate the robust and insightful dialogue over the last 28 hearings. I think it elicited good conversations and questions and challenges to departments in the upcoming fiscal year to do more for residents in the city of Boston. As Emma mentioned, I'm going to review quickly some of the changes and some of the overall impacts that we think the FY19 budget will have for next year. Last week, the mayor resubmitted the FY19 operating budget at $3.296 billion and a Boston Public Schools budget of $1.112 billion. The final recommended FY19 budget is $138.4 million more than FY18, or about 4.4%, and the resubmission contains $2.5 million in new targeted investments. These additional resources were made available through both increased projected revenue and new savings identified over the past few months. As Emma mentioned, and as you all know, the mayor, the council, and other stakeholders continue to push Beacon Hill for Boston's fair share of state revenue. Thanks to that continued advocacy, we expect about $1.5 million in new state revenue from areas like charter schools in Chapter 70. On the savings side, thanks to Boston's AAA bond rating, we were able to reduce our projected debt service costs for next year by about $1.1 million. Both the new revenue and new savings that we identified were reinvested into targeted investments raised either during the hearing process or through some of the coffee hours or through some of the additional dialogue that we've been able to have over the past few months. But before I get into some of those resubmissions, I just want to touch on quickly the overall budget, starting with revenue. As you can see here, it's about $3.29 billion, and again, $138 million more than last year, with property tax representing about 70% of the budget. So despite some of the good progress we've made on state aid, we continue to see declining state aid as a portion of our city's budget, with state aid making up about 14% next year. Other smaller categories like fees, permits, and fines continue to expand, but modestly, with a growing economy and new industries. Quickly moving on to overall spending. At nearly $3.3 billion, the FY19 budget represents about $138 million more than last year. First and foremost, education continues to be 40% of the budget, with a $71 million increase over last year. This includes funding for meaningful investments that the administration has made, including extended learning time, moving towards universal pre-K, and investing in our teachers. The budget also dedicates about $637 million to support public safety operations of our growing city, including, as Emma mentioned, new police classes, new firefighter classes, new EMT classes, new technology and safety equipment for firefighters especially, and new public safety facilities like engines 42 and 17. On top of both the public safety and education investments, it includes investments required to keep pace with the cost of doing business in Boston and providing world-class city services. It also includes millions in data-driven investments that respond to both a growing city and demands from residents. Quickly touching on the Boston Public Schools budget, with a $51 million increase proposed in this resubmission, this will bring the Boston Public Schools budget to the largest budget in history and bring it to $175 million, or about 19% since the mayor took office. Of that $51 million next year, $40 million will go directly back into school budgets for local school leaders to make funding decisions for next year. The FY19 budget for BPS also includes the 3 research-backed investments that I just mentioned. So that's early childhood education, excellent teachers in every classroom, and more learning time for students. Specifically, in the FY19 budget of that $51 million, $10 million in new funding is going to be dedicated to serving our highest need students in our highest need schools. A $2.5 million investment in Cellwell, so that's social, emotional health, and well-being of students, including next year more nurses, more psychologists, and more social workers in classrooms facing students. It includes $1.7 million to expand district-wide programs such as Excellence for All and Becoming a Man, and $2.2 million in high-impact technology training and innovation to ensure that our classrooms are ready for a 21st century. It also includes a significant investment of $30 million to ensure that BPS continues to offer market-leading salaries to attract the best high-quality teachers to teach our students. Again, quickly touching on some of the initiatives that are contained in the resubmission that are major signature items. Emma mentioned the new public safety investments, including $2 million for the phased rollout of body cameras and $48 million in capital funding for engines 42 and 17, two new firehouses built in the city of Boston. Thanks to this body's support of the parking fines proposal a few months ago, the budget includes $5 million in new capital and operating funding for roadway resurfacing, sidewalk repair, expansions of the Walkable Streets program and the strategic bike network, and launching the city's first transit team. The budget also includes new funding for prevention and treatment of addiction services, funding to fully support the engagement center, and the funding needed to rebuild the Long Island Bridge. Again, as Emma mentioned, new housing funding through IDP and linkage, leveraging the CPA and other resources, doubling the down payment assistance program, and investments to prevent displacement. I could go through every department and list all the myriad of investments, but I know you've heard a lot from departments through the 28 budget hearings who highlighted a lot of these changes. So with that, I'll just touch on quickly the resubmission items, and I want to thank all the counselors for the dialogue during the process. I think some of the investments you see here today are a direct reflection of your advocacy during both the individual hearings and then in conversations that we've been able to have over the past few months. The first one that Emma mentioned is a investment in quality UPK. That's about $850,000 included in the BPS budget to expand the number of high-quality seats to by 80. We also include doubling the Youth Development Grant Program, building on the success of the first year. We had over 100 applicants in the first year, and we think that this doubling of the program will provide more opportunities and deeper opportunities for those grantees. $300,000 in new funding to meet demand in preventing malnutrition for seniors and backfill declining state and federal aid for that service. A new city-funded outreach position at the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Advancement. A new mounted park ranger, bringing the total of new rangers in FY19 to 2. New equity and inclusion staff at the Office of Economic Development. And as the mayor announced a few weeks ago, $500,000 for workplace sensitivity training that will support expanded training on racial and gender bias, sexual harassment, and employee awareness. So with that, I will close and say through strong fiscal management, strategic saving initiatives, the budget resubmission allows for further investment in quality city services in neighborhoods across Boston and builds on the success of existing city programs. We believe firmly that this is a budget we can all be proud of, and we look forward to implementing it in FY19. So I want to thank you, councilors, for your work and collaboration during my first budget process, and Emma as well. And we're happy to answer any questions for you.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you both for your responsiveness and working with us as a body to get to today's hearing and hopefully a final vote tomorrow. Just looking at, from my time on the body, property tax, the percentage of property tax supporting our budget continues to go up. I think when I started, it was mid-60s maybe, and now it's 70%. And I know that the bond rating, some partially relies on the fact that we have more diversity in our revenue sources.
Sure.
And I know we have very limited capacity to tax, but the newest potential revenue source through the internet sales tax, have we, done any calculations? Or we're going to get, will we get our local option through that internet sales tax when it's implemented?
So I don't know the answer to that, but we can certainly follow up on that. I've not heard anything about that. I mean, I think the first estimate that I heard about the statewide impact was something like $100 to maybe $300 million for the state. So certainly, a much smaller slice, if anything, for the city of Boston. Interestingly enough, when we did our ratings presentations this year, Counselor, we actually got positive feedback because they felt like our property tax collections were so stable as compared to state revenue, that was actually, in one report, a credit, favorable credit outcome. But I think that does not diminish at all the challenges that come with declining state revenue, and the fact that, we really want to be able to make significant investments in the city of Boston, probably most notably in universal pre-K, and without additional state resources, we are not able to do that. And so it's something that we continue to look for new opportunities to maximize, both in engaging our partners at the state, but also looking at our local receipts and other things that we can understand what we can maximize so that we can have additional resources for investment.
Right. And to piggyback off what you said, we did a little better in our reimbursements for charter schools, as well as state aid as a net. And again, what was it again? I think 1 point.
Sure. So we increased the projections for next year by 1.5 million. The House and Senate are in the conference committee right now for the state budget, so we won't know exactly how much we'll get. I think the 1.5 million is probably a conservative estimate based on the lowest common denominator between the two, but we won't have an exact figure on that until they finalize their budget, hopefully in time for July 1st, but oftentimes that does run a little bit into July.
Right. And remind me again on the marijuana we don't get any tax revenue from medical. We should make that clear. However, we will be getting, once recreational is licensed and starts operating. What's that? Is it a 4%?
Sure. So thanks to this body accepting the 3% local option back in December of 2017, I'm sorry, we have projected about 2.25 million in city revenue from that tax. That's based on a slow rollout, and it's the same overall market share that the state has used in their own internal projections. As I'm sure most of you are aware, the state has a 17% tax on this. We have about a 3% of that, a 3% tax on top of that. So we're using the same numbers as the state is to project for next year, but it is dependent on the market rollout and sort of shops being up and running in FY19. But it's a phased, we're projecting a phased rollout of marijuana sales.
Right. And not to get too macro here, but, with this tariff war going on, we don't know really how it's going to impact local economies, whether it's farmers in the Midwest or, corporations in our own city. And, if we were to go into a recession, how do you think we would weather that kind of situation?
So the city of Boston has a long-standing reputation for being very well-run in terms of financial management. It's something that Mayor Walsh, I know, prioritizes, and that this council has prioritized. And so I think because of the prudent use of our resources and ensuring that investments that we make are affordable long-term, that we are well-positioned. Certainly, our reliance on property tax would be affected because one of the largest components of our growth in property tax every year is new growth in the city of Boston, and that is something that would likely be impacted at some point should there be, a multi-year recession. So.
Right. I mean, the bad old days. I think you guys were at the State House at that time, so you went through your
Yep.
your difficult times as we did here locally from '08 till probably 11 or 12 when it actually started coming back. So let me thank the mayor, all you and your team for, I think a thorough, thoughtful budget review this year. And let me now recognize Councilor Ed Flynn.
Thank you, Council CMO, and just want to thank you, Council CMO, and thank Mayor Walsh and his team for working closely on this budget. I've only been on the City Council for half a year, and I want to take this time to especially thank my colleagues for their time in educating me about the budget process. I think we worked well together and with the Mayor's office to accomplish some important goals. I'm proud to work with all of you and look forward to accomplishing a lot together. I just want to highlight on the FY19 resubmission investment page. Just want to say thank you for the city-funded position at the Mayor's office for immigrant advancement. I think that's going to go a long way to helping so many immigrants in our city. And it's a credit to your team and to the Mayor that that funding was added into the budget. So I just want to say thank you. And as it relates to the Boston Public Schools, I know more money is going into nurses, social workers, and psychologists. And also want to thank you for that, but I also want to continue to work with Boston Public Schools to make sure that when we do look to hire people, that we are seeking a diverse group of candidates, especially candidates that also speak a language other than English as well. That'd be very important. And just a general question, I think I have a good understanding of it, but can you give a broad definition of the significance of having a top bond rating, what it means to the city, and what it also means if that bond rating is decreased?
Sure.
If you can kind of comment on that a little bit.
Sure. I would say, in short, the most direct impact is on our ability to fund our capital plan and execute on our capital plan in a way that is the most affordable for the city of Boston. So having a exemplary bond rating like the city of Boston does allows us to borrow money to execute long-term capital planning at a rate that is affordable for the city and that doesn't continue to sort of eat up more of our operating budget in terms of debt service if we are able to keep those interest rates that we pay down. So I think there's also obviously some just general favorability and credibility for the city of Boston in having a strong bond rating. It really is we like to talk about it a lot in terms of something to tout, but I think that it actually summarizes a lot of other more detailed, strong financial management practices that the city has. And so it's really sort of one fact that we can point to that summarizes all of the ways in which we manage the city's finances, from the way that we approach the annual budget to the way that we manage personnel and, a whole myriad of other things that we talk about with the rating agencies every single year when we update our rating. And so it's just a nice way to sort of encapsulate exactly what's happening at the city in terms of managing our finances.
The only thing I would add is in a very micro sense, we were able to find $1.1 million. So we had our recent bond sale about a month ago that freed up additional funding that we were able to put right back into programs and services that were highlighted during the resubmission process.
And that was directly the result of the city being a strong, exactly, a place where people wanted to invest, in part because of the bond rating, but also because of our reputation as just being a place that people want to be and a place that manages our finances well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. And we were joined during your presentation by Councilor Kim Janey. Chair recognizes Councilor Anise Sabi-George.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, too, for all the work you've done to get us to this point. And thank you both. I have a couple of questions about the resubmittal and wondering about the the best clinicians. So last year, we had worked on, in collaboration, on getting 4 best clinicians that would be part of the operating budget of the Boston Police Department. Unfortunately, the funding that was dedicated last year only filled 2.5 positions, or actually 2.6 full-time equivalents. This resubmission, the original budget and the resubmission does not include additional funding to right-size these positions that we had championed, cheered for, and celebrated as 4 full positions, FTEs, last year. Can we reflect about why we weren't able to find the additional $140,000 or so to fulfill that commitment?
Sure. I would say it's really broken down 2 things. I think that there was an investment made at the time with what the projected was of what the salaries were. Something that we didn't take into account is when you're charging other departments, like BMC, for instance, in this case, they have to add on the fringe rate for what that costs, and that wasn't included in the original budget investment that we had at the time. On that point, I'd say we continue to work with both the BPD and the BMC to find those resources. I think there's also a scarcity issue where we're not being able to fill those positions. So even if the money was there, BPD was having a hard time filling them with people. It's definitely an issue that we continue to work with the police department on to right size, exactly like you said. And I think it's something that we're hopeful and optimistic going into FY19 that we might be able to find that.
It'll be difficult to right-size it when it's not fully funded.
Right, absolutely. I think it's one of those things where as we're managing BPD's budget throughout the year, that if, say, we slip a week in the cadet class or the police class, or, it takes an extra week to fill a position, that creates salary savings within the budgets that we might be able to redirect towards either finding the fringe to be able to pay for those people or, offering more competitive salaries to fill the positions.
And then at the Boston Police Department hearing, we talked about the importance of having a crash analyst. That was once a grant-funded position, and that also was not in the resubmitted budget. Can you talk to me about who at Boston Police will be able to do the crash analyst that I think both the advocates, the police commissioner and his department, and the council were advocating for?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say from a staffing perspective, I'd have to look back at my notes for what that exact grant was and what the purpose of it was and why it wasn't fully funded moving forward. I'd say as part of the larger transportation investment, we're making a $5 million investment to make our streets safer. I think that hopefully through some of that and some of their traffic engineering work, we're really beefing up the staff at the Boston Transportation Department to work on signal timing, to work on engineering, to work on street redesign, to hopefully alleviate some of the concerns around crashes, especially pedestrian and bike crashes. So I hope that some of that work will be picked up through there. But we can certainly continue to have discussions with BPD about that specific position. And again, as they're managing throughout the year, see if we can find available resources to fund that type of position.
And then for BTD, of those 20 positions that will be part of the additional funding they're receiving this year, or the next fiscal year, can you tell me what those positions will be? There was no real conversation about how those individuals will be dedicated.
Sure. Let me just pull up our summary here, just run through them. So some of the specific positions are, there's a position around, and I'm just going based on what I remember off the top of my head right now, but there is a position that will be related to coordinating with the TNCs and better management of TNCs throughout the city of Boston, as well as
the MBTA. So it's really broken down into kind of 3 components. The first is launching the city's first transit team. So that's going to be positions at BTD that are dedicated to working with our partners at the MBTA. As a reminder, we send about $80 to $90 million to the MBTA every year.
83 something to be exact.
83 something to be exact every year. So this would be really a position to help work and coordinate with the T to make sure we're getting the most bang for our buck for that $83 million. The second, as Emma mentioned, working with our partners in the TNC realm and also sort of new technologies like autonomous vehicles and other sort of emerging technologies to make sure that if they are using our streets that we are paying for at the end of the day, that they're using them correctly and they're sort of maximizing that. There'll also be a fair amount of traffic engineering and traffic planners. BTD is actually greatly looking forward to doing a career fair to sort of fully staff up these types of positions. I know occasionally in the past it's difficult to do some of the one-off investments, so they are making a concentrated effort to hire more engineers, traffic signal mechanics, and the third component I would say is staff dedicated to the bus lane. As I'm sure you guys are all aware, the Rosendale pilot worked out very well. So these are positions that would work with the MBTA on the bus side to make sure that lanes are clear for the dedicated bus lanes that are used both by the MBTA and the Boston Public School System. So there's a kind of a hodgepodge of different positions, but with the idea being that this would sort of make real impacts both on the traffic side, but then also help expand the capacity of BTD to get more slow streets done, to get more Vision Zero work done, to really deliver on a lot of the work that the $5 million investment would accomplish.
Thank you. I'll save the rest of my questions for the next round.
Thank you. And we have been joined, but he stepped out, Councilor Michael Flaherty and Councilor Michelle Wu. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Siomo, and thank you and your team for your leadership and shepherding us through this process. And thank you to Central staff and Michelle and Kate as well. And thank you to you guys, Justin and Emma, for your hard work on this budget as well as the administration. I do want to applaud or start by applauding the investments in, youth development fund, which of course I still want to see in the millions, but I think it's doubling it is a great next step. I want to echo Councilor Flynn in the funding of the position at the Office of Immigrant Advancement, particularly given the issues that we continue to hear about the national level. More and more questions are going to come in, not just to us, but to them. So thank you for that, as well as the investments in body cameras, pre-K, and the sensitivity trainings. I had specifically a couple of questions. One is on the universal pre-K. What is the need right now in terms of the number of seats that we need or that our folks are waiting for? And what are we funding now, and what's the gap? And what's the gap not only in terms of numbers, but also in terms of what additional resources would be necessary to close that gap?
Sure. I'll start with Boston doesn't necessarily have an access issue to pre-K. It's the quality universal pre-K that we have a problem with. So right now in City of Boston, based on some analysis done by Ron Dorsey, Chief of Education, BPS, there's about a 1,500 seat quality gap in the city. The mayor, since he's been in office, has closed that gap through both working with our federal partners through a PEG grant and the city making more investments in both BPS classrooms and community-based partners. The investment contained in the resubmission is $850,000 to expand the number of community-based quality seats by 80 to help close that gap. All along through our advocacy at the state level, through both our legislative finance packages around redirecting convention center money, we were trying to close a funding gap, which we believe to be in the $15 to $20 million range to really close the 1,500 seat quality gap. And we're starting to put our money where our mouth is when it comes to taking the reinvestments that we're getting from the state through additional charter and putting those towards more quality seats. But the size and scope of it is beyond what we're sort of able to do in one fell swoop in a lot of ways. So we're sort of slowly chipping away at that 1,500 seat quality gap, but with the goal to be to close that if we are able to access more state resources in the future of a larger magnitude.
What do you mean by quality gap?
Sure.
So like there might be a young person, so I'm a mom, I have my child sitting in a seat that I'm just not happy with because of the services that are provided at the facility or location where my child is, and so
Sure.
I'm looking for something else?
Sure. So it's more that the seat is not, there's a sort of set standard of quality, and it is around sort of the curriculum they have, the rigor of the education that they have, and it's essentially gearing up those quality community-based seats to be ready for a BPS education. So when we look at the number of seats that are available in the system, there's about 7,500. There's about 6,000 seats that the sort of BPS and folks deem of quality, meaning they have academic rigor, they have the right curriculum to work into a BPS program. The idea being that over, a certain period of time, we'd be able to expand the number of quality seats to close that gap. Because right now there's actually excess capacity in terms of overall seats, but not all of those seats are quality.
Okay, I was under the impression that there were some folks who are still waiting for seats within our system.
Within BPS?
Yes.
As a BPS classroom, yes. So when we talk about the 7,500, we're talking about all seats, both community-based seats, so your Head Starts, your Sunshine Daycare, all of the different providers out there.
Okay.
This type of investment, this 80 seat investment is actually to bring those community-based providers up to a level that would be considered quality in the BPS curriculum.
So the 7,500 seats include seats not only in BPS, but those seats in providers
Yep.
external to BPS. How many are in BPS?
I think it's about 40% of that. I'd have to get you the exact number.
So roughly 40%. And then how many of folks are waiting on a BPS list to get one of our seats?
That I don't have. I can certainly circle up with BPS to get that answer.
So that's the number that I would like to know. I go to meetings with, whether it's the Haynes or other early ed providers, and I know they have a wait list of folks. So I'd like to know what that number is and what additional investments are needed to close that gap within the BPS system.
Yep.
I know we're not there yet, but I applaud the additional investment, but would like to know where else do we need to go in order to close that. And lastly, I have just two more questions. Well, actually, I'll ask one more and then I can save for the next round. The workplace sensitivity training, what is that going to look like when it's rolled out? How many departments are going to benefit from this? Who's doing it and what does it sort of entail?
Sure. So we're in the early stages of determining what the scope of that training will look like. As the mayor announced, I think last week or the week before, it will start by focusing on the public safety agencies, and we anticipate doing a procurement so that we are bringing in a vendor who is familiar with best practices and sort of the newest information on how to have these conversations. The rest of it is still very much part of an ongoing conversation that we're having about how best to manage those resources and make sure that they are sort of both deeply felt in the organizations that are sort of first on the list, but also we are able to spread widely across city government because this is something that we think that everybody in city government will benefit from.
This was 500K. And so workplace sensitivity includes what sort of racial and gender bias, sexual harassment, employee awareness, or something else? Or we're leaving this up to the vendor to describe?
So we are very much still determining exactly how we will write the procurement for those services and what the scope of that will be. And those are part of ongoing conversations in terms of how to define that to make sure that we are addressing the issues of highest need.
And the public safety agencies to start are police, fire, and EMS?
Certainly police and fire, while EMS is under BPHC, it's something that we very much could consider as, the third option.
Okay, I would love to, as this is sort of unfolding, I know it's a topic of discussion amongst many counselors on the council about
Sure.
what it's going to include, what is it, what's the intended impact it's supposed to have. I mean, I think, I often talk about this because I tend to take on issues in the public safety space. We look at our firefighters, our officers, and say we need to equip you with better training around workplace sensitivity, or race and gender bias, sexual harassment. Obviously, every city employee needs this, including us. And it's important that every city employee have the opportunity to go through something like this. And I think, we want to get out of the space of just thinking it's we should do this in the public safety context or health commission. I know the Office of Equity at BPS is doing some great work. So I would love to know not just what this is going to actually include, but what would it cost to make sure that every single city employee goes through something like this?
Sure.
What does customer service training look like? I mean, you can imagine walking into this building, going to pay a parking ticket, and if someone treated you disrespectfully, they probably need training too. And it's just as important as training our public safety agency employees. I just have one more question. Can you remind me on page 4, the other departments that are 8%, what's the number there of the departments we're talking about? And any other questions I can save to the next round?
I'll have to do the math quickly, and I can circle back to you on your next round of questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Siomo.
Thank you.
Oh, I have to add, and thank you for including the council budget in the proposed FY19 council budget in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Emma and Justin. Congratulations on a as smooth a first budget process as I have seen in the last 8 years. I want to just go through, make sure I think I understand it, but the resubmittal increases and the one decrease, if I can just go through them with you. I don't know if, do you have this sort of précis of it? Okay, so line 182, economic development, $100,000, that's the equity inclusion staff.
That's correct.
The, let's see, line 142, human resources, $500,000, that's the youth development grant?
So that's actually the diversity training. Or
Diversity
the,
training,
the harassment
perfect.
training, yeah.
Okay, thank you. The 387 elderly commission, that's the nutrition program?
Yep, so that's a nutrition program.
Great. $250,000 police department, that's line 211, that's more diversity training?
No, that's the youth development grant.
Youth development
So
grant,
that's where
gotcha.
we're doubling it to 500,000.
Perfect. 112 city council, 272, 515, that is the staff budget increase. That is not council salaries, that is the staff budget increase, correct?
That's correct.
Housing trust reserve, a minor, oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah, housing trust fund, a $68,000 increase, what's that?
So as part of the collective bargaining agreements that we've agreed to, or the council has ratified since then, one of them included a initial investment in the housing trust fund for, I believe, custodians, but I'd have to double check on that specific union for you.
I see. So that's, was that drawn from the 999 reserves for collective bargaining?
Yep, so all the, so PHC, Boston Public Schools, ISD, I believe is on there too, all drew down from the collective bargaining
Yeah.
reserve and had positives, and the collective bargaining reserve went down for those.
Okay, and what's in the current status of the collective bargaining reserve is 38.3? 38,300,000?
Yep.
88,000, okay. And that's a healthy amount for what we need to cover, in your opinion.
I would say, and I think I was burned the first time I came here and said it was going to cover exactly everything, but it's one of those things where it's our best estimate at this time. We certainly have to see how some of the negotiations go over the coming months.
Okay, perfect. So then that 901 decrease, oh, that's just the total, I'm sorry. And then BPS, the $3.5 million, that's mostly pre-K?
So it's about it's actually $2.5 million for collective bargaining,
Okay,
and then it's about 865 for the universal pre-K.
and how many seats is that again?
That's 80 seats.
80 seats, okay. And will those be at existing early learning centers?
Yeah, so I think what they'll do, and I certainly defer to BPS as they roll this out, but they'll issue an RFP for providers that are interested in getting the curriculum and getting the quality of their programs up, and they'll sort of see what type of respondents they come back and move on and work with those providers that are selected through the RFP process.
Do we have enough space currently in the buildings? I don't want to go too far
Yeah.
off message, but
So these would be for providers outside of BPS buildings, so your Head Starts and your
I see.
other different types of programs. I think there is a question on BPS of whether expanding existing classrooms is possible right now for the pre-K. It's really about the mix of where the seats are,
Yeah.
from my understanding. And I think that's conversations, those are a little bit wrapped up in the Build BPS and sort of the future of facilities in the
Yeah.
public schools.
well, I will certainly be advocating for that, to have more K-0 seats on BPS facilities, I think is and to then create feeders to some, traditional elementary schools, I think is what we ought to do. Terrific, and then going through the major fiscal 19 initiatives, transportation, 5 million new capital operating, you talked about the, some of the Washington Street dedicated bus lane, some other things, the strategic bike network expansion, including, I believe, into District 6, particularly West Roxbury at long last. What is the timeline on that? Do you know?
On that one specifically, I don't know. I'd have to check with our Chief Osgood.
Yeah.
But the overall program is to just expand the strategic bike network in different areas that are lacking existing bike lanes right now.
Okay. Could you maybe get follow up with the chief at some
Yep.
point today and let me know? That'd be great. All right. Well, thank you again both for your good work. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chairman Siomo.
Thank you. And we've been joined by Councilor Lydia Edwards. Councilor Zachem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know in the original budget submittal there was one new position for mounted park rangers. Has the second one been added in this resubmittal?
Yep, so this would be two new
Great.
rangers.
So that's that 33,000
Yep.
addition under Parks and Rec. So, and that is up to Commissioner Cook, or I guess now Chief Cook, when how to do that. But the money is there in the budget.
Yep, it is.
Great, excellent. That is my only question. I will just reiterate, and I feel that we say this every year and in every session about the need for a downtown K-8 school that will serve downtown residents. That certainly, as we continue to move forward with capital planning for BPS, and I think the needs and the population of our city that needs to continue to be addressed. And I know my constituents, and I think many of both other downtown neighborhoods who are represented ably by my fellow councilors feel similarly about that, and would love to see that moving forward. But I appreciate, again, this process and the chairman's artful shepherding of this once again, and I'm really excited to see those additional park rangers. I think you're going to get a lot of excited folks, and I think just as importantly, if not more so, I think a better and a safer experience in our parks. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just like to commend the administration and the work that you guys have both done in the budget, particularly in the resubmission. And not so much a question, more a comment and a concern that involves the Inspectional Service Department, because we're working sort of on parallel tracks. And of course, Commissioner Christopher does a phenomenal job, extremely accessible, and obviously as a true company guy will tell you that he's fine, that he doesn't need any help. But if you just think about just in the last few months what we've done with respect to on the student housing issues, on the rental inspections, on the Jim Brook stabilization, on sandwich boards, on the short-term rental registry and the Airbnb stuff, along with we're experiencing unprecedented construction and permitting in the city, all that go through his department. I just really think, and this is maybe sort of more forward-thinking to the next budget, but really got to give some thought to increasing capacity over at 1010 Mass Ave for inspectors. And they run the gamut. They're going to be housing inspectors, but we need plumbing inspectors, electrical inspectors, just again. And then what we don't hear or see enough of is after the project is done, to have someone sort of double back to make sure that the building was built to spec. So I just think that when you talk to folks over there, he's got a great team, he's got a great staff, they work extremely hard. It's a department that actually generates a significant revenue for our city, so I guess it's a money-making department. Sure. A lot like, I would argue, sort of a transportation department. You know, our meter maids pay for themselves. Well, our inspectors pay for themselves too. So I just think that, again, moving forward, and now it was probably too late in the budget process to kind of catch what occurred with the short-term rental registry, but even on the data collection side that we're all asking for around these issues, you know, it's critical from a policy perspective, but it also gives us the information so that we can make adjustments from that point. So, and I'm sure if Buddy was sitting here, he would tell you that he was fine and that the department's running on all cylinders and that he can handle it, which that's just true testament to his work ethic and his abilities. But at the same time, you know, we're just seeing, you know, volumes of new additional work and registration, and we're plugging them in with Do It, and we're plugging them in with D&D. Right. And I just think that as a matter of basic fairness, we really need to take a look at ISD and find out, you know, where we can enhance their ability to function, but also to increase revenue opportunities for the city. I think Inspectional Services and 1010 Mass Ave has been a moneymaker, and I think we should enhance its ability to do that and generate more for our city. At the same time, reduce the waits, reduce the lines, and even if you talk to folks that are in the development and construction world, they would actually pay a premium for expedited service. You know, if that's even possible. So think a little outside the box and see what some other municipalities are doing. But I think that they're treating sort of their inspectional service departments a little different than we are, and I think that we might want to double down moving forward. Other than that, that's just sort of my opine. Get an opportunity to kind of read through all these documents and be prepared for tomorrow. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilor Janey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for all of your work. This is my very first budget season on the council, so I appreciate all that you do. Also want to thank the mayor and his team, and to you, Mr. Chair, for just kind of shepherding this process and making it easier for some of the newer folks. I have a couple of questions that I want to focus on, and I won't take too much time. I just kind of wanted to go down the list. So the first thing, I think, excellent on the charter school reimbursement. I've, testified before the school committee I've been kind of just banging that drum about the need to make sure that we're doing more to get that reimbursement that Boston needs to fund our schools. That being said, on the pre-K, I just kind of wanted to follow up on some of the other questions and points raised by Councilor Campbell. So my advocacy has really been around how to expand the pre-K seats for Boston Public Schools. And I certainly appreciate and understand the importance that our family-based providers play in our city, as well as our center-based providers. You know, as a young mom, I used a family daycare provider, and so they play a very important role. But I also know that there are many families who want the option of a pre-K seat. And so I'm really interested, and if you don't have it now, I really want to understand if, in fact, we want to, and I want to, so just so we're clear, offer guaranteed seats for 4-year-olds. Never mind what we do for 3-year-olds within BPS, but guaranteed seats for 4-year-olds. What would that take in terms of a dollar amount? What does that mean in terms of our capacity? So I'm really interested in that. You know, I applaud the city's efforts to expand pre-K across the board, the fact that we need to have more quality around some of the other seats. That's great, but just in terms of making sure that we have guarantees for families of children who are 4, what does that look like? I'm just going to go down the list. On the 500,000, so I heard you say that we're going to start with public safety, so does that mean some of this could go beyond the public safety?
That is the hope, yes. So we certainly invested quite a bit of funds here so that we are able to, you know, as I mentioned, meaningfully impact public safety in terms of the training that we were able to execute, and then go beyond that into other city departments.
Right, so I'm particularly interested in what is going to happen with a fire department and the police department. In the fire department, certainly, I mean, all departments could benefit, I think, from racial bias, sexual harassment trainings. In particular, though, I wanted to kind of focus on the fire department. So how will this $500,000 be divvied up? And what is that process for determining how much of the $500,000 goes to this department versus that department?
Sure.
Or other departments?
So as I mentioned, I think we're in very early days of determining the planning around the funding, and it's something I'm happy to come back to you on and talk more about as we get some more information. We are engaging people across the administration who are invested in the outcome of putting together a really meaningful training, people with background in human resources and diversity and women's advancement and other things, so that we are being really thoughtful about what we're doing here. And we just haven't had the luxury of planning time to really come back with a detailed plan about what that will look like, but it's certainly something that I'm happy to follow up and talk more about.
Is any of that money being dedicated for a psychologist within the fire department?
We haven't made any specific plans yet. We're still very early in the process.
I'm interested in that, making sure that there's a psychologist there. So I'm going to quickly go through the list because I know there are others.
Sure.
Youth development, excellent. Love to see that doubled, so thank you for that. Same thing with the immigrant advancement. I think, you know, that is critically important, as Councilor Flynn has already indicated. On the new equity and inclusion staff for Office of Economic Development, tell me more about that.
Sure. This is a priority of Chief Barros. It's something that I think he's been looking for a while to really enhance his team and bring more dedicated resources to an area that I think he thinks a lot about, but is something that he'd like to again, dedicate a particular staff member to. And it's something that he's in the process of planning.
Right, so could you just talk me through how much money, how many FTEs are we looking at here?
Yeah.
So I would say that's probably a little bit to be determined. I think the idea with it's a $100,000 investment that would get a sort of position of significant weight, so that would be a more high-ranking position, I think. I think the exact salary that we'd have
So it's $100,000, the investment?
Yes.
Because it's just not on the cover sheet here. Excellent. And back to the racial and sexual harassment training there, you talked about a procurement process. What's the timeline on that?
I don't have a timeline at this point. Again, I'm happy to follow up when we have that. I think we need to have an internal discussion first to actually figure out what that procurement would look like, and actually design that, and design very first what are the goals, right? And who's receiving it when, and what does this look like, so that we can craft a procurement that will be successful. And then we will know more about the timeline.
Okay, thank you. I'll save the rest for the second round. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and I wanted to again say thank you for your immense amount of work and the amount of follow-up and the amount of re-follow-up and doubling up and coming back and answering tough questions, and at least trying to get to a middle where we can see where we're all going. And I will just also say thank you for the incredible capital investments in our schools and schools in my district, in particular in our parks as well. We're very excited about that. It's a real investment in families. I really like to see the investment in housing. Not that I'm biased about the Office of Housing Stability, but I'm very happy to see that it got the funding for the program for legal services, which I think is incredibly innovative. It'll be the first time the City of Boston, well, not the first, but on an expansive level, that the City of Boston is really working with legal services to advocate for folks in our city. So I hope it's the beginning of many examples of where the city can support legal services. We're one of the major cities in the United States that doesn't actually have like a city-funded or run version. So kudos for that. I also wanted to say I'm really encouraged by the amount of, not the other investments in the schools, but again, back to the food. We were talking about that actually just recently with the composting and food justice, and just how for many folks who grew up on free lunch, this is a game changer for them. It's a real health and equity issue. So again, thank you for that. Just to follow up on some of the other questions, again, back to the funding for this $500,000. Before I get there, do you have a cost right now for the independent investigation that's going on? Do you know how much that cost the city?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can certainly follow up.
I'm assuming it's going to continue into the next fiscal year. What's allocated for that?
I don't think that there's a particular amount allocated. I'm assuming it's within their general sort of legal budget. But let us get the details and we can follow up.
Yeah, because I would assume it's not because it's an independent extra added cost, or do you just have a line item for independent investigations for sexual harassment and assault? I mean,
We don't have a line item for that.
all right.
Some departments have sort of a legal services item that as things come up that they need to deal with, that would come out of their budgets. So that there is a place where you can fund something like this when it comes up and comes sort of unexpectedly and not neatly within the budget process. So I'm assuming that that's where this is coming from, but let me confirm and I will follow up with you.
Okay, and then again, just following up on the $500,000, the training fund. That I feel like it came from a good place. I just feel like it's also a reactive place and more for window dressing. Unfortunately, I'm not convinced of what it's going to do, mostly because I'm hearing that you don't know. And it's frustrating because when I heard I feel the same kind of theme from the BFD, asking them for accountability and what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And it was I don't know. So now we're throwing $500,000 worth of I don't know at a department that doesn't know what it's doing. And we're dealing with sexual assault victims. We're dealing with a real issue. And my concern is that you can throw 50, 500, 5 million. If the city doesn't have a plan, which we don't for this, then what's the point?
So I certainly agree with you that particularly in my position, I would never waste $500,000 without a plan. And so that is exactly the point of the process that we are in right now. This money is within the A&F cabinet. It does not go directly to the departments who are going to be taking the training, the first public safety departments. It is purposely put there so that we can put some structure around a process and be very thoughtful about this. We are also waiting for that investigation so that with the fire department in particular, we know what areas need most directly to be addressed. And we will continue with the planning process for this training money with the best information that we have, so that, again, we can construct something that is meaningful and important. But certainly, should we have information from that investigation that further helps us understand where the most important places are to make an investment, then we will include that as well.
So I understood that the investigation was different from this funding. That
It
this
is.
right?
It is.
So,
Yep.
so whatever happens on an investigation, how that would inform implicit bias training, or how the two are totally separate, right? You're going to train on one issue of gender, all those things like that.
So, right, as I mentioned,
Or is
that
the
process
funding
is,
for the BFD?
no, it is not.
Okay, then, so what happens in the independent investigation might have its own line item and its own investment and its own funding to deal with that.
That's correct.
It's
It is
not gonna
funded separately from the
okay, so they're
$500,000.
separate.
They are.
And then-
All I was meaning to say is that if there's something that comes from the investigation that helps inform how we spend the training funds, then that will be helpful. But that process is ongoing and is separate from that investigation. I don't know the timing of when the investigation will end, but all I mean to say is that the intent is to be the most thoughtful with this funding, to not waste it, to be very purposeful, and for it to have the most impact. And that's our goal.
And for it to be permanent. I assume this training isn't just a one-off response for the Globe and for press. Like, you're going to continue this? Will it still be a $500,000 investment every year?
The purpose is for it to be meaningful and impactful, and so I think we will need to determine where that type of training lives on an ongoing basis. So I don't know whether
the intent is that it would be ongoing.
well, I don't know whether we would bring in a vendor and have an outside vendor do an ongoing training. The city does do ongoing trainings, and so there may be another place. There may be other resources. It's something we need to look at, and I just don't have a thorough vetted information for you at this point to be able to answer that question, but it is something that the mayor is incredibly committed to, and that the Human Resources Department is committed to, and so it is not something that, when we complete the expenditure of that $500,000 will come to an end.
So, I mean, again, we don't have a plan for it. We don't know what it's going to do. We don't even know it's going to continue, but we're fully committed to it. And that's where I get obviously a little confused. And so might I make some suggestions for some of this funding beyond the training, which I think is I don't think training actually should be the goal. I think there should be an actual comprehensive committee set up where they are regularly meeting with the folks who are impacted, be it that they are people of color, that they are that they're women, that they're gay or lesbian, but they are particularly folks who are underrepresented in an agency, that they have regular check-ins with them, that there is an independent review of how they are being treated on a regular basis by independent, not paid or not regularly involved with investigating. I'm someone who comes in there completely neutral, not like the independent investigation we have right now. And someone and an entity, hopefully also representative of the community, that they can speak to and go to, be it that involves a psychologist that Councilor Janey was talking about, but a real commitment of individuals rooting out and dealing with the individuals who are also the perpetrators. I mean, all the training in the world for a bunch of people, they know how to click a box, they know how to nod, they know how to feel something, and then we can pat ourselves on the back. Well, some people will pat themselves on the back. I'm going to still hold this administration accountable for this. And so, again, I'm going to just say I'm not satisfied. I think this $500,000 is window dressing, and I'm again, no plan, then I don't see any point. I'm done.
Counselor Wu?
Thank you, and I apologize for coming in late, so I know I'm sure I've answered this before, but I had just one question on the equity and inclusion staff for the Economic Development Office, and then I wanted to just follow up on Councilor Campbell's line of questioning. So could you just explain again, sorry, I'm sure you did this already, what is this position, is it multiple positions, and what are they doing?
Sure. This is a senior position within Chief Barros's shop that will be, I think, overseeing, coordinating, providing additional focus to work that often is happening within his department that is focused on equity and inclusion.
So is it BRJP? Is it outreach for procurement? Is it?
So I think the latter. The department, the cabinet is undertaking a fair amount of studies around disparity, economic inclusion, access to city and state contracts. This position would help coordinate some of those efforts along with, other aspects of, I would say, IB 2030 and implementing those plans to ensure that all development and all economic development comes within an inclusion framework and sort of lens.
Okay, and so it's a supervisory role within the office?
I think the exact job description is still sort of to be determined and sort of what oversight it would have, but it's certainly a more senior level position.
Okay, and what's the salary?
The intent is the 100,000 to be the salary of the
Okay.
position, or the at least full-on cost of the position.
Okay. Sorry, Emma, did you?
No, I was just saying the budgeted amount is 100,000.
Got it. And then just on the early ed seats, so I just would like to understand what these 80 seats are, because I heard you talk about a 1,500 seat gap, which I would dispute. And I would also dispute that it's not about access, it's about quality. It's really about affordability. So we have, I mean, I had the numbers that I'm really grateful that BPS had sent to me. 190 seats were available for 3-year-olds, and we had 972 people waitlisted, I think it was. So 80% of folks did not get a seat and were on the wait list. For K1, 2,288 seats were available, and we had 2,570 people apply, so only 11% were waitlisted, many more seats for 4-year-olds than for 3-year-olds, but it's still 1,064 kids who were on the wait list who would have loved to have a BPS seat because they're quality, but also because they're free. So I think that's just a major thing to keep in mind, that the gap is way more than 1,500 seats at this point. If there were free seats available in larger numbers, we would see way more than the 1,000 kids on the wait list. I guarantee you that. So the 80 seats, is that new BPS free seats?
No, so this would be money that goes to BPS to then have them release an RFP to work with community-based providers to fund the seats and then to bring the quality of the programming up to a level that would be considered a quality program under BPS standards. So a BPS curriculum with BPS standards for UPK. I can't speak to the 3-year-olds, but we can certainly follow up with BPS and get the exact details. When we talk about the quality seat of the sort of the gap, the 1,500 seat gap, is there's a demand for 700, essentially 6,000 quality seats in the city on any given year, and there's about a 1,500 seat gap in the quality of.
I mean, that's
the
what
seat.
people are paying for now, I think. But people they're moving out of the city because they can't afford that. They're giving up other things that they're paying for. So I dispute that characterization in general, that it's not about access, because when you couple affordability with access, it's very much about access. And there are many other people beyond the 6,000. So, that's a whole separate session that I think we'll take up later. But just on the 80 seats, so will there be 80 additional free seats available in the city of Boston, or no?
Yes, there will be at community-based providers.
So it'll make it such that the people going to those providers will not have to pay?
That's correct.
Okay, and they will be full-day seats comparable to the BPS seats?
Yeah, so they would be the standards of the BPS program, so I don't think that they'll have extended, but similar to BPS program and curriculum.
So they won't be in classrooms, but will students still lottery through BPS to get to them, or how will they know about the free seats now at these?
So I think they would work through the existing providers, so as those providers have folks come and apply for them, or come and ask for, or look for seats in their programming, they would be eligible for them.
So some providers will have seats for tuition, and some provider, and the same provider would also have a sort of BPS funded free seat?
Yeah, so it would work similar to the PEG grants, where we received a grant from the federal government to expand, I think it's 250 seats, where we now have the money flow through BPS, and they worked with the providers to expand the curriculum, professional development, and then they pay for the actual seats at the existing sites.
They pay for the funding pays for the seats, or the parents pay for the seats?
The funding
pays for the seats, okay. I'll follow up separately, but I would just to really want one more level of detail on what exactly the 80 is going to, and what types of providers, and this and that. Okay, and then my last question was on the CCE funding, which I had asked about last time. Was there any other clarity about what that will go to, or?
So we had about, I think it's 100,000, maybe 99,000 in the budget for environment to hire a consultant to do the RFP around it. So that's a very technical RFP that has to go out for the CCE aggregation. I think once the budget is adopted, they'll sort of finalize what exactly the consultant is, or who the consultant is, and sort of what the scope of their work will be.
So so it is funding to hire the consultant and complete the
application, or I guess it's
The
an RFP.
first draft of the aggregation plan. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could you, I'm trying to get clarity too on these seats now without turning this into an
Sure.
hearing. You mentioned Head Start as being a not quality seat, right? Do we know how many Head Start seats there are throughout the city?
So not Head Start specifically, but the combined BPS, so a BPS seat in a classroom and a community-based provider is about 7,500 total access seats available. So if you were to max out every contract, the amount of quality seats, and I'll put that in very loose terms, because both BPS and I think state EEC has a definition of what quality is, and it has a certain curriculum that flows directly into what.
And Head Start doesn't meet that standard.
So I would say Head Start is one of the programs that would be eligible for these types of funding. So they would apply for it, there would be an RFP, and then there would be a commitment by that group to have professional development, curriculum development, and then this funding would pay for that specific seat in a community-based program. I use Head Start because that's a well-known community-based type program.
Right, right. In most Head Start it's income-based, so they are, based on a person's income. And the 80, so let's say the 80 seats go to Head Start, how would you divvy it up? Like, would it go to one program in Alston Brighton, for example? Probably not, right? But you would, in order to meet your definition of quality, they would have to improve their curriculum and all the standards to meet quality. So if you had 10 Head Start programs throughout the city, just for the sake of the argument, and you put 8 kids in each one, we could bring up the standards. Like, is that how it's supposed to work?
Sort of. I think the exact seats and where they're located and the exact type of programming, I think, is a little bit to be determined. They'll essentially, similar to how the PEG grant was initially released, they have an RFP. Providers come to the table and say, we're interested in becoming a quality provider, or we want a quality classroom, or whatever it happens to be. And then sort of this city, through the federal government in this case, provides the funding to bring up the curriculum to secure the seat. So it's a quality seat that is free for that child. And then the way this funding would work would be very similar. Is over the summer, they'd release an RFP, and different providers would come to the table and say, I'm interested in expanding a classroom, expanding existing classroom, or starting a new one that would be a deemed a quality classroom, and I need professional development, I need salary compensation to increase, and then the cost of the seat would be paid for.
Right. And just one other factor is, I think Head Start starts infant toddler all the way through first grade or kindergarten.
I'm not sure on Head Start. I have to check.
Anyway, I'm going to let that go. And then I would conclude by saying, if we are having a hard time filling positions in BPD, Methuen might have something to do with it. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you again, Chair. I have a couple of questions on the resubmittal of the Boston Public Schools budget. And I know as part of the initial submission, there's a policy shift and goal to make sure that no school has less than a 0.5 nurse in each of their buildings. Do you know if any school, because of that shift in policy, which I think on the baseline is very good, but how many schools are actually losing a portion of a nurse to get to that 0.5? For example, 2 schools that share a nurse, one may have a 0.4 nurse and one may have a 0.6 nurse. So to correct or to come up to that policy of a 0.5, the 0.4 will move up to a 0.5, but then the 0.6 moves down to a 0.5. So can you articulate at all the schools that will be losing any portion of a nurse?
I can't articulate that, and I can't say for sure. I would say that the intent of the investment was never to reduce the existing nurses in existing schools. That would be counterintuitive to what we're doing. I think it's trying to bring additional resources to schools that don't have it. So if there's a 0.4 and a 0.6, I don't think the intent, and I would defer to BPS, and I would want to circle back with them. I don't think the intent is to sort of offset any of the costs in between them and have this be a zero-sum game. There's a $2.4 million investment in nurses, psychologists, and counselors. The idea is to increase staff, not sort of, reshuffle the deck in that sense.
Right, I would be interested in that information because I think that it is important, and sometimes things happen over there that are counterintuitive. And then on the rest of that $2.4 million investment, we talk about the additional mental health, behavioral health, emotional health support services. Can you tell me, and you've said it, but I'd like you to say it again for me, that these will all be student-facing positions?
So I think everything except for perhaps the director of social work that I think they're interested in hiring would be the only non-sort of student-facing position, but the director of social work would head up the new social work unit that would oversee positions that are all student-facing.
And that director of social work will also ensure that our social workers are licensed and are continuing to receive continuing ed credits and developing. Because we do have a habit of sort of setting our mental health, behavioral health specialists on the, put them on the loose and then never sort of reconnect with them and support them in a meaningful way, which is, in the end, not good for anybody.
Sure.
On the investment that was in the initial budget of 2.4, and I think doubled to $5 million for school security services, that's actually in the capital budget. Can you talk to me why that's in capital and not in operating?
Sure. Like any fixed asset that has a longer life than a few years, we like to invest in it on the capital side. I think as a testament to our expanding and ability to fund a little bit more freely what the investments are. It's just it's an eligible capital cost, so we thought in order to maximize the investment we have in there, it makes sense to put it on the capital plan. It also goes hand in hand with a lot of the work on Build BPS and facility assessments on understanding exactly what schools, where, what school the needs are, sort of that whole Build BPS unit has a sort of expertise in the needs of the capital needs of schools. So putting it in the capital budget makes sense financially, but then also operationally.
And then does that, though, include any school resource officers?
So no, that $5 million investment is purely in security, doors, locks, and cameras and stuff like that.
Yeah, great. Right. I have some concerns. I've shared this with the operations team that deals with school security. I have some concerns about the process to the audit for the approximately 10,000 doors in all of our schools and the RFP process to have all of those doors repaired. The district has a lack of information, so that I don't think that the RFP process will be as efficient as it can be and as timely as it should be. And then on Build BPS, again, we know what the investment is in Build BPS. We don't know where it's going to end up. And that's, I think, this budget process has only demonstrated that further, that we've got this investment that we've made, but we don't know where it's going, what it's going to look like, never mind over the next 10 years, over the next few years. And I do hesitate to support a Build BPS fund that is supporting some of the smaller fixes. I'm talking about roofs and boilers and windows that we do regularly and should do regularly. It should not be part of a facilities plan, a master facilities plan. When we think about that investment, I also want to add that I think we are missing some opportunities on non-traditional classroom space. Our parks, just that the school maybe has that land or that our students actively use, and then also the use of some outdoor space, whether it be playgrounds, and we talked about playgrounds in the Community Preservation Committee and the funding of those playgrounds, and whether or not that money was appropriately used for playgrounds, but there is nowhere else that we're paying for playgrounds. So we need to do it that way, unless Build BPS is going to look a little bit broader and a little bit more creatively about how we use our exterior space. And then, I don't even know how far I want to go into this, but then last and not least, it came up again in the Boston Police Department hearing, the changes in criminal justice reform, which we all applaud and I think almost all of us, if not all of us, support. We haven't seen a reflection in changes that are happening at BPD. That crime lab in particular is going to need to change the way it does business. It does not have the adequate staff to do the work that's mandated in the new legislation.
Definitely something that we're monitoring closely. I think hopefully, if it hasn't passed already, then it'll sort of be in a future either supplemental budget or budget is state support for those types of changes. And I think that hopefully we'll be able to make our case to and advocate for some of that funding, because I think that it runs the gamut of investments in local police departments, but then also other criminal justice reform issues that people have raised, whether it be parole or probation. And I think hopefully that the state took that into account when they passed the law, and that funding will flow to help right-size some of the new requirements.
I think that's it. Thank you.
Counsel Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Siomo. Just following up on a couple of things, and there might be a longer conversation around these seats, but is there a reason we don't resource them within BPS, that we don't create the seats within BPS?
So I would say
At the schools that have waiting lists?
Sure. So I would say, and I would definitely defer to BPS on the exact specifics of this, but I think the demand for some of those seats that Councilor Wu mentioned are in areas where the space isn't there for it. So it would be a much greater investment to build a new classroom, essentially, where there's just no physical capacity to have those types of seats. And in some of the work that Chief Dorsey and the Education Cabinet have done over the past few years, in that they've demonstrated there is a demand for community-based seats out there. There's a reason that we haven't sort of pursued a New York City model where they just expanded the K-1 seats, is that there is a demand among parents and folks in the community that they want those types of community-based seats, with the expectation that we can sort of have additional funding flow to them that would increase the quality and get them into a BPS curriculum and then give them pathways. Right now there's 2 pilot programs going on, one in Dorchester and one in East Boston, where we've partnered with community-based seats and then given them a pathway to BPS programs. And that's the type of investment that I think we're looking to support as an administration, that gives parents a choice at the end of the day, because not every parent is interested in, and I will certainly never dispute the wait list, because there is definitely a wait list for some BPS seats. It's just that there are some capacity issues at specific schools, and then there is also a contingent and a vocal contingent of parents and I'd say parents of children in Boston who are interested in community-based seats at the end of the day.
So I think what would be helpful, and this is, I know, a longer conversation, is not only the numbers, I know Councilor Wu referenced those, but the current numbers that we're talking about, what the need is in terms of BPS only, what the numbers are in terms of folks on the list who are waiting, because I'm sure that's changed by now. How we identify using metrics that need that you're talking about for community-based seats, what are the numbers there? And then if those 80 seats could not be used within BPS, specifically why not? I mean, which ones are at where is there a current waiting list? And we can't add because of capacity, or we can't add because of resources. Being able to have that, those numbers, I think, are extremely important. This is something that people are talking about every single day, and I know my colleagues as well. So I'd just love more on that sooner than later would be great. Going quickly to the BPS transportation, and I've been talking about this for a while. I mean, I know the last time we talked on the RFI, it was a conversation about whether or not that can happen. Where are we with that?
I think we're happy to talk more about ideas for looking anew at BPS transportation, and happy to engage on suggestions you might have about a way forward.
But I'm assuming right now we can't, no appetite to do an RFI currently.
I think we would just want to understand what are we looking for in the RFI? How are we tailoring it? What types of responses are we looking for? And I'm certainly happy to talk more about that.
Well, I guess regardless of how we shape it, and it could be very general and open, and I've said this at several BPS hearings and meetings outside of the hearing space, the goal is to look at what is out there in the world, not even just in Massachusetts or in this country, where folks are providing transportation and reliable transportation and could solicit or sort of could send their thoughts and ideas to us to give us a sense of not only who's out there and could provide reliable transportation to our families and our students, but do it at a fraction of the $120 million that we're spending right now. An RFI can go out in different forms. You already know this. but the question, I guess, is, are we able to do that? Are we, as far as I know, we're not legally prohibited from doing something like this. We're not excluded from going out and seeing what's out there. The contract, as far as I know, doesn't prohibit it. So I guess the question is, can we do this as a way of looking at, or at least pulling in other thoughts and ideas around what we can do in terms of transportation?
I would need to check with somebody to make sure that I'm not speaking out of turn, but I believe you're correct that we are able to do it.
Okay. And then I think that's, yeah. Oh, and the number of departments, was that 40 plus? I can't. And then we can keep circulating. Thank you, guys.
Counselor Wu.
Okay, at the expense of doubling or quadrupling down at this point on the, I just want to clarify what my question is, and I think there are some easy things to get out of the way. I'm just confused about a few things about the seats. So, by universal pre-K, do you mean 4-year-old seats?
Yes.
Just K1 seats?
Just K1 seats.
Okay, so right now you're saying that there'll be 80 new K1 seats available somewhere that are free, and then there will be a total of 3,290 free K1 seats, free quality K1 seats somewhere in the city.
The
Or you're not sure about
3290
the
number?
So the 3290 is in your bullet
Oh.
point, expanding, bringing the total number of FY19 high-quality seats to 3290.
Yes. Yep.
So of that, I mean, the numbers that I had from BPS after the first, both of the priority rounds were done, was that there were 2288 K1 seats within BPS, which means that right now you say there's about 1,000 free K1 community seats
Yep.
somewhere.
Yep.
Okay. And you're not touching 3-year-old seats at all with this budget then?
That the intent is this is for, that's a good clarification, is when we say pre-K, we mean K1.
Okay, and then when you say there are 6,000 quality seats right now in terms of no access gap, you mean K1 and K0?
That would just be K1.
That's still just
I'd have to double
K1?
check on the 3,000
So,
number.
yeah, what's the 3290 that's in your bullet point versus the 6,000 is my question, I guess.
Yep, so I think that might be free versus paid seats.
I see. Okay, so, all right, so there are 1,000 free K1 community seats, about 2,300 free BPS K1 seats, and then another 3,000 K1 seats that people are paying for somewhere but that you deem quality, and then another 1,500 that are either paid or free but not quality.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, so I was hoping to see the 190 K0 number go down, or go up rather, in terms of number of seats, but that's, okay, very helpful. And then just on Councilor Campbell's other point, about why not just expand all at BPS, I do want to just make sure that in all the talking points, it's not just about space constraints. It's also about this idea that immediately putting everyone into free BPS seats would totally destabilize community providers. That's something that came up in our sessions that we did, that the community providers rely on the tuitions, whether coming from BPS or a grant or from parents, tuitions of 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds, or 3 and 4-year-olds to pay for the infant care, because it's a lot more expensive. So they would essentially go out of business on the infant side if they didn't have the toddler tuition coming in. So it's not just space at BPS, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
But it is
And I
helpful
think that's
to
why
know.
we're pursuing a mixed model, is that we support our community-based providers and as both job creators, and then as areas that parents are interested in sending their kids.
But there's a distinction then between, are we limiting BPS free seats because there's no space and we can't, or because we don't want to destabilize? And those are two different conversations. So I very much want to see the answer in terms of what are the space-only constraints. Sure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Sabi-George?
I'm all set, thank you.
Okay, great. That concludes the review of this resubmittal budget for FY19. I want to thank you again, Justin, Emma, and your entire team for a very comprehensive review. This hearing is adjourned.